空英才艺媒体营开始报名喽！7月共2梯次，3天打造媒体精兵。5月5号前享早鸟价，详情请洽空英商城。现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Tickled by the crunchy fried taste of tempura, today on Advanced. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to Advanced Radio. I am your host, David, and today is May 5th. 2021, we are on day 3 of our food article. We were talking about some novel foods, cell-cultured meats yesterday, otherwise known as Frankenmeat, or meats made in these kind of interesting ways. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more down-home, traditional, not fried chicken, which is what it sounded like, but we're going to talk about from the way I opened up the episode. No, we're going to be talking about tempura. Now, I'm joined here by two brilliant panelists who love to cook themselves. Can I have you introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Hannah. It's good to be here. I've never made tempura before, but I'm excited to get to chat about it.
All right.
And my name is Garrett. It's good to be back. Good to be talking about food, although, of course, it makes us a little bit hungry, doesn't it?
It sure does. Thankfully, we had lunch before we had this program, or else I don't think I would have made it through. I'm already hungry, though, talking about all this stuff. Even talking about those shrimps and the shumai yesterday and all that. I felt pretty hungry about that one, too. We also did that one right after lunch. This one's also right after lunch, so thank goodness. All right, now, tempura. When I think about tempura, I think about a lot of different things. We won't get into that yet, but I want to ask you guys, because this is what it makes me think of, night market food. I think of tempura, nice little crispy fried nibbles, right? Little stuff you can put on a stick or whatever, eat in all these different ways. I think of night market food. So just kind of as I'm thinking about it, why don't we just talk about that for a little bit? Why don't you guys tell me, what's your favorite night market food?
Well, I do love fried food. So when I think of the night market, I think of having a little paper bag with a little stick. Mm-hmm. And I like to eat popcorn chicken and sweet potato fries and anything greasy and salty and fried. That's what I'm there for.
That's what's up. That's what's up. How about you, Garrett?
Yeah, night markets are fun because you can walk around and eat things. So sometimes they also sell, bowls of soup or noodles, and that never sounds that appealing to me. I also want something fried, or I love to eat pig's blood cake is probably my favorite night market food.
Lehigh. Not my favorite, but I'll eat it.
It tastes great.
It has a taste. It definitely has a taste. I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite. But that's cool, though. I like that. We got our favorites. We go to the night market. We have those things that we're looking for. Sometimes you try something new. A lot of times you just go to the ones that you're going to love. Right? It's just kind of the way that goes. And I agree, Garrett. A lot of times the places where you can sit down and get maybe something bigger. I don't know. I like that sometimes when with a group of people if we went there for a meal. But a lot of times the real appeal of night markets is just walking around, looking at all the things, feeling like you're part of this river of people, the whole river Nile aspect of it. It's a summer night, the sun's gone down, it's a little bit cooler, you're out with some buddies. Oh, hey, look, it's a night market, it's got flashing lights, all kinds of scents and smells and people and activities and sounds. And you just want to go and be a part of it. That's the way I feel about it anyway. When I go to a night market, though, one of my favorite things that I always look for, something very simple, just sausage on a stick. Can't go wrong. I love it. It's just like this big old sausage on a stick with the garlic on there, get you a little, some of that and just walk around, eat your sausage. I love it. That's one of my favorite things at a night market, just sausage on a stick. But I've never had tempura in a night market, I don't think.
No, actually, yeah, you might think of it because it's fried food as a night market food, but there are some very fine Japanese restaurants that serve only tempura.
I did not know that. Have you been to these restaurants?
I haven't been to the very fine kind, but I have been to the moderately fine kind.
Okay,
and it's delicious. It's amazing what different kinds of ingredients they use. And it can be a really nice sit-down meal.
That's right on. And we see one example of tempura down there in the middle of the page, a nice crispy shrimp. We've been talking about shrimp for the last 2 days, so we can kind of touch on that again. Hana, have you ever eaten tempura before?
Yeah, I've actually been to one of the restaurants, maybe even a level below the fineness that Garrett was describing, but it's actually next door to a night market, so it's kind of ironic. But it's a nice restaurant. You go in, sit down, order way too much food. It's always a good time.
Right on. I think I've had tempura recently at when I was in the city of Geelong. Actually, went there for Moon Festival, and a friend of mine invited me out to a little Japanese place. We had some tempura and these kinds of some sort of barbecued or grilled meats and stuff like that, classic Japanese style. Very good. Just to briefly touch on this, one thing that I find confusing is you have tempura, right? And then you have these other words that I've heard here, right, in other parts of East Asia, tianbula and tianfulo. Right, so what's kind of some of the difference? Have you guys heard? Do you guys kind of know the difference of these? I know that tianfulo that's a kind of special thing I've had in Geelong once, and oh man, it's one of my favorite things. Actually, it's more of like a fish paste with a sauce. But then tianbula, or I think I'm saying that wrong. But Garrett, what is tianbula?
Well, often in Chinese cuisine, it would be more of kind of these fish-based kind of sticks that are probably kind of battered at some point along the line, but usually you have that in a soup or with a sauce or barbecued.
Okay, and have you ever had that, Hannah?
I haven't. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I highly recommend trying it in the Geelong night market.
Nice.
Oh, it's pretty good. There are like 3 different places in this one area that all have it. But there's one place that's the best. If you go, I'll tell you.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Good. All right. Now, enough about that, though. It is time for tempura, the Japanese style of frying these little nibbles of food. Nibbles, and just use that word to describe small bits of food that are battered and fried and have this nice kind of gloss on them. Oh, it sounds delicious, right? Well, let's get into it. We're going to go into our first reading, which is going to be that first paragraph, and we're going to find out what's inside within that reading as well. Let's do it.
Time for tempura. No one knows for sure the origins of the Japanese word tempura, but one theory is my favorite. The word is written with 3 picture characters. Ten, which is also the first part of the word for heaven, pu, indicates a woman, and ra is a type of woven silk gauze. Put them all together, and you end up with something like woman clad in silk gauze, giving a glimpse of heaven. That's not a bad description of tempura, a delicious nibble fried in a light, gauze-like coating. What's inside? Tempura cooks for only a few short minutes. Any longer, and that gossamer coating will burn. Shrimp is a classic. So are small or thin vegetables. The best tempura I ever had was a soft-shell crab claw.
Just a moment ago, off the air, our sound engineer, Marco, was waxing poetic, or talking beautifully about some tempura that he had even as a child that some of his relatives would make for him. I asked if he wanted to just come on in and do the show with us, but he's got to manage the soundboard, make sure we all sound okay. But it's just something to be said for, tempura has had a big impact on a lot of people, right? And it's delicious and memorable, as particularly for Marco, I'm sure for a lot of other people as well. Now, talking about the origins of the Japanese word tempura, I like how the article starts off kind of giving us okay, where does the word come from before we get into the food? There are apparently a lot of different theories, but one theory is this writer's favorite. What's that theory, Garrett?
Well, he says that we can break the word up into 3 different parts. He calls these words in Japanese picture characters. Those would just be the characters of the language.
Right.
Our first one is called ten, which is the first part of the word for heaven.
Yes, the first word is heaven. The next part is Hana.
Pu indicates a woman.
That's right. And the last is Ra, a type of woven silk gauze. And gauze is a very thin, light cloth used for making different kinds of clothing. So when you put all of these things together, you end up with woman clad in silk gauze, giving a glimpse of heaven.
Yeah, based on those three translations of the different words and that sentence that he gives us, I feel like he's adding some things there. Right. I don't know where he gets giving a glimpse of heaven from, but it sounds fun.
It certainly does. And clad here is just a word that means dressed, dressed or covered. It's kind of a fancy way of saying like dressed in. I think the idea here is really, okay, tempura tastes good. That's the idea. It tastes good and it's fun to eat, right? And that's the way he describes it. He says it's not a bad description of tempura, which is a delicious nibble. You've heard me say that a couple times, so you're ready for it. A delicious nibble, which is fried in a light gauze-like coating, right? Now, what's inside, Hana?
So there can be a lot of different things inside. That's the beauty of breading things. You can bread just about anything and toss it in some hot oil and have something delicious. The nice thing, too, is it only cooks for a few short minutes. So whatever you bread, you want to make sure it's something that can cook through pretty quickly. So you don't want to have a huge piece of chicken or steak that you bread because the inside would be raw and the outside would burn.
That's right. Exactly. If you cook it too long, then the gossamer coating will burn. Our sound engineer actually said something about how in Japan, when he's visited Japan, he's seen guys cooking tempura. They pay lots and lots of attention to the temperature of the oil and for how long it's got to be in there, like down to the second, probably even down to the half second. Garrett, have you ever cooked in that way where you have to pay a lot of attention to those kinds of details?
Well, yes, of course, cooking many things is that way, but especially when you're frying things. I think fried foods often get a bad reputation as being very unhealthy. Sometimes it can be very oily or I love that verb that Hana just used, breading something, is when you add kind of like a floury batter to it. That is not the most healthy thing in the world. But frying things doesn't have to be unhealthy. If you're using a good oil and you're cooking at a high enough temperature, that oil isn't necessarily going into the food that you're going to eat. And so you can cook it at the right temperature, take off the oil afterward, and it doesn't have to actually be a very unhealthy dish.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Keep that in mind. Write that down, listeners. And we have this word here, gossamer, which is very delicate and light. That's describing that outer coating. If you cook it for too long on the gossamer coating, the silk gauze that the woman is clad in will burn, and then it will no longer be a glimpse of heaven, right? Got to watch out. You got to watch out for your cooking temperature. Well, kind of going back to what's inside the tempura, shrimp is the classic. Also, there are small or thin vegetables. And the best tempura that this particular author has had was a soft shell crab claw. That sounds really good to me, right? Now, we are going to go more into the cooking science of it, which is where I really want to let you guys shine as some of your cooking experiences and thoughts on cooking. We're going to be talking about choosing the batter, and we're going to learn a couple of different theories on how to choose the best tempura batter. Let's hop into it.
Choosing the batter. Traditional batter is exquisitely simple. 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of water, and 1 egg. Though some add baking powder, and a bit of sugar can also be added. A more modern update uses cornstarch in place of flour for a crispier crust and replaces the water with club soda on the theory that the bubbles make the batter lighter. I also checked out J. Kenji Lopez Alt, who uses science to make cooking better. He agrees that the best tempura uses club soda and as much cornstarch as flour. But he also suggests an ingredient I never would have considered, vodka. It limits the development of gluten in the batter, he writes, which keeps the batter lighter for longer. Which one to use? In the interest of science, I tried all three.
All right. How does he describe the traditional batter, Hannah?
He says it's exquisitely simple. That means it's perfectly simple, or it inspires feelings that are very strong. You're so happy. It's so wonderfully simple. So it's a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of water, and 1 egg. But there's also some modifications. You can add baking powder, sugar, and as he'll go on to talk about, there are other ways you can change it to make it even better.
That word ratio is used often in cooking, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's because in cooking science, what really matters is the interplay of ingredients with each other. So if you have a certain amount of flour, which is a dry ingredient, you need a certain amount of an egg, which is a kind of binding ingredient, along with a certain amount of liquid. So you need everything to interplay in a way that makes it the right texture and consistency.
You can write into advanced@studioclassroom.com to request a place in Hannah's cooking class. We're going to be starting that up. All right, and Garrett, but thank you. That's a great answer to that question, and that certainly helps me to understand. I'm sure it helps our listeners as well. Garrett, how about some of the updates that Hannah was talking about?
Yeah, we see 2 of them in our article here as this writer is exploring what is the best way to make tempura. I love that. I think it's great to learn the classics, the basics of how to make something, and then to explore it. Not only how can you make it better, but how can you make it new, something that you enjoy. So first we have a modern update. So something that's newer, a new way to kind of try and make this batter. It uses cornstarch instead of the flour. They say in place of the flour to make the crust or the outside crispier. And it replaces the water with club soda. They say on the theory that the bubbles make the batter lighter. Now, that's a great thing to do. You can do that in other things that make batter. I've done that when I've made crepes before. Using club soda is a great way to make those.
Okay, club soda is referring to what some other people might call soda water or seltzer water, right?
That's right.
Okay. And how does that work anyway? Like, it's carbonated, right? It's got the bubbles in it.
So you're adding air into it.
Oh, I see.
I know with a lot of foods, in the last few years, there's a certain Japanese pancake that's become very popular because it's really airy. Now, that's actually because of egg whites. Here we're adding air through the club soda.
Okay, so it's all about adding air. It can make something obviously.
Yeah, and that's not always my favorite. Again, this is all about preferences. Sometimes you want something light, and here it's crispy. Sometimes I just want something thick and kind of hearty. So it depends on what mood you're in.
For sure. What's your mood? What are you making, right? Now, Hannah, do you cook with alcohol often?
I do sometimes. The nice thing is alcohol can add really good flavor, but usually when you cook with it, the alcohol itself cooks off. So it's safe to serve to children or people who don't drink alcohol. One thing I really like adding some red wine to is when I make like a pot roast or a beef stew. It's really nice to add some red wine to that to add some nice flavor. Recently, I made beef stroganoff and added some red wine to that, and it was outstanding.
Oh, that sounds so good. Where was I? Come on, Hannah.
Sorry.
You gotta call a brother over for dinner.
Okay, next time.
Okay, all right.
You're both invited.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You can write into advanced@studioclassroom.com to have Hannah invite you over for dinner. I'm kidding about that last one. Yeah, not correct. Kidding about that last one. All right, now, but going back to cooking with alcohol, I think it's interesting here. Garrett, I want to ask you about this. Hannah spoke to the benefits of cooking with alcohol to add some flavor. But here, this guy, J. Kenji Lopez Alt, who has been kind of looking into the way to make the best tempura, he agrees that club soda and cornstarch are good options, right? But he also suggests this other ingredient, vodka. Now, what does he say that what does he say about adding vodka to the batter? How does it help?
Yeah, well, before I say that, I just want to make a plug. Friends, if you want to learn more about cooking, you're curious about the best ways to make something, and to not just look at a recipe, but really learn about it, check out Mr. Lopez Alt. I love reading his website. It's called Serious Eats for anyone who's interested.
Okay.
And here, a change from the modern update of the tempura. He doesn't just use the cornstarch. He mixes it with flour, and then he does add alcohol in the form of vodka. He says it limits the development of gluten in the batter. So gluten is this kind of stretchy thing that helps to hold bread together or things made with flour. But this vodka is stopping it from creating that gluten or bringing it out so that the batter can be lighter.
So it's kind of making it more brittle. Is that how you would describe that maybe? Because it's not being held together by that gluten as much?
I'm guessing that sounds right. I would have to see what it looks like, though.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Well, please do take Garrett's advice on that. Check out that guy if you're interested in cooking science. I might check that out myself, actually. I like cooking every now and then, although it's kind of nice to have people cook for me. Garrett is actually an amazing cook. I have been to his house for dinner, and boy, I tell you, that guy knows how to throw down in the kitchen. Anyway, Garrett gives us a really good description of what the vodka does in the batter, which keeps the batter lighter for longer, probably makes it a little bit crispier. In any case, the writer of our article, in the interest of science, he says, tries all three. And he's going to come up with a verdict that he's going to share with us in our next reading. So why don't we check that out now?
The verdict. The traditional batter was the thickest of the bunch. The irresistible taste of the fried crust was the most evident of the three, but only by a little. The modern update was particularly pale and thin. It actually didn't taste bad, but neither was there anything notable about it. The Lopez Alt science-based version of tempura was lighter in texture as well as color than the traditional method, and more shatteringly crisp. It probably came closer to the ultimate tempura ideal.
All right, here comes the verdict. Hannah, traditional batter, what's it like?
Well, it was the thickest of the bunch. So the traditional one, I'm sure it's still pretty light. This tempura is traditionally a light coating, but this one was the thickest of the bunch. But he says it tastes good. It had the best taste, but only by a little bit.
Okay, all right. It's sort of the irresistible taste of the fried crust was the most evident. That's something that's very trademark of tempura, right? How about the modern update, Garrett?
Yeah, his description of the modern update isn't quite as appealing. It says it's particularly pale, or kind of a light color, and thin, so there's not much of it there. But he does say it didn't taste bad. There just wasn't anything notable about it. There wasn't something to remember it by.
Right. It tastes kind of boring, right? Kind of boring according to this description. Now, the Lopez Alt science-based version was lighter in texture and color than the traditional method, and more, I love this, shatteringly crisp, right? He says it probably came closest to the ultimate tempura ideal. Hannah, which one do you want to try?
Oh, definitely the Lopez Alt version.
Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
For sure, yeah. Now, are there some other cooking tips that you've found for making tempura?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes. So a few other things you should keep in mind about how you're preparing, not just the ingredients you use. It's important to keep everything cold. When you're trying to make something like this, it's good to use chilled club soda, if you're using that, chilled vodka. The reason for this is cold liquid is more viscous. It's a tiny bit thicker than warm or room temperature liquid, so it'll cling better to what you're frying. Another thing you should take into account is you don't want to whip and stir this batter very much. You want to leave it alone. As soon as you stir it and get kind of the lumps of flour or cornstarch out, walk away, because the more you stir, the more that gluten is going to form. So the flour and liquid bind to each other tighter and tighter, and that's not the texture that you want.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Garrett, have you ever made tempura before?
No, I have definitely battered things. I've breaded them and fried them, but I've never made tempura. My brother has, though, and he was very good at it. It was delicious. And as you can see in our pictures there on page 14, you're not just eating the fried foods, but you have some great dipping sauces with them, too.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And as with all things in life, the real good stuff is in the sauce, right? You can, sometimes, there are some things that I eat just so I can eat the sauce. Actually, we talked the other day about how I'm allergic to shrimp. Well, when I was a kid, I wasn't allergic to shrimp. I loved shrimp. And every time we went to this seafood restaurant called Red Lobster in the States, I would always get the cocktail shrimp. And I'm going to tell you right now, it was not because of the shrimp. It was because of the cocktail sauce. That was the best part. That's what I miss most about cocktail shrimp is the cocktail sauce. Well, anyway, it has been awesome having you guys on the show. You're the perfect people to have on the show talking about tempura and cooking. I'm sure that our listeners feel very much enlightened about cooking science and all that. I certainly do. I'm looking forward to having you guys on the show again and having you listeners joining us next time for Advanced Radio. Until next time, I'm David.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Garrett.
And we're saying goodbye for now.
Goodbye.